In the aftermath of World War II, America was rebuilding not only its cities but its identity. Returning soldiers wanted homes, families, and safety. A slice of the American dream neatly packaged in a small house with a white fence. Developers rushed to meet the demand, carving vast stretches of farmland into suburban neighborhoods. Rows of identical homes rose like dominoes across the landscape, uniform and peaceful, each promising comfort and order. But behind that order lurked a problem that developers soon discovered: chaos. Without oversight, neighborhoods fell into disarray. Lawns went untrimmed, fences mismatched, and cars piled up in driveways. Property values dipped, and the illusion of perfection cracked. To protect their investment, developers created something new: a set of written rules and a private governing body to enforce them. These were the seeds of the modern Homeowners Association. At first, HOAs were simple. A handful of residents, often volunteers, would oversee neighborhood maintenance. They collected small fees, kept parks clean, and ensured homes looked pleasant. Seemed harmless, even helpful. Families saw them as protectors of their property value, a mechanism to keep everything nice. But what began as a friendly neighborhood committee soon became a miniature government. Developers realized that HOAs offered more than order. They offered control. By establishing associations, developers could maintain power over entire communities long after the homes were sold. Contracts known as covenants, conditions, and restrictions, or CC&RS, became standard in every new development. These documents dictated everything from house colors to mailbox shapes, and homeowners unknowingly signed them the moment they bought their property. Few read the fine print. Even fewer understood it. At first, the system worked smoothly. Communities stayed tidy, lawns were green, and everyone appeared happy. But beneath the surface, something darker was growing. The rules were rigid, the penalties harsh, and enforcement absolute. Once a developer handed control to residents, those same strict systems didn't vanish. They evolved. By the 1960s, suburban expansion had become a symbol of middle-class prosperity. Yet, as more neighborhoods adopted HOAs, tensions began to rise. People started to realize they had traded freedom for conformity. A family could own their home, yet be told what kind of flowers to plant, what car to park, or even how long their holiday decorations could stay up. Those who resisted the rules were labeled problem neighbors. And so a hierarchy emerged. At the top stood the HOA board, often a small group of residents with time, money, and strong opinions. They enforced rules with zeal, citing community standards as justification for every letter, fine, and warning. Most homeowners complied quietly, too busy or too intimidated to resist. Others learned quickly that challenging the HOA meant isolation, legal fees, and endless meetings filled with hostility. The rise of these associations mirrored a deeper cultural shift. In a time obsessed with image, the HOA became the ultimate curator of perfection. Lawns trimmed to regulation height, paint colors within approved shades, and silence maintained after 10 p.m. The suburbs were no longer communities. They were managed environments. Behind the polished facades, resentment brewed. Some homeowners began to see their HOAs as private dictatorships, run by neighbors who wielded power like a weapon. Stories spread of families fined for kids' toys on porches, for cracked driveways, for the wrong type of mailbox. In one infamous case, an elderly couple was sued by their HOA for flying an American flag in their yard. What had started as an effort to protect values had transformed into something far more controlling, a system that valued uniformity over individuality. Developers, meanwhile, saw the profit. HOAs relieved them of long-term maintenance costs while keeping property values high. Local governments loved them, too, because they took over public responsibilities, road maintenance, landscaping, security, without costing the city a dime. Slowly, HOAs became the backbone of modern suburbia. They were no longer optional. They were expected. By the late 1960s, over 1 million American homes were under HOA control. By the 1980s, that number had multiplied several times over. Politicians and developers pushed them as a solution for community stability, marketing them as the ideal balance between freedom and order. But those who lived under their rule began to notice something else. HOAs operated in the shadows of law. They could fine, sue, and even foreclose on homes without the same checks and balances required of public government. Power had shifted quietly, from the individual homeowner to the private board. The people enforcing these rules weren't elected officials. They were neighbors. And neighbors, when given authority and anonymity, could become something else entirely. The system thrived because it looked innocent. On the surface, it was about cleanliness, safety, and pride in ownership. But in practice, it became a structure where ordinary citizens could enforce their vision of perfection on others and punish anyone who disagreed. By the end of the decade, the American dream had a new guardian, one that watched, fined, and dictated every aspect of suburban life. The lawns were greener, the fences straighter, the neighborhoods quieter. But the price was freedom, and few realized just how much they had given up. The first chapter in the story of HOAs ended not with outrage, but with quiet acceptance. People believed the system worked because it maintained order. Yet the foundation was already cracking. Power was shifting in ways no one could yet see. Because once you give control away, even for the sake of community, it never truly returns. And in the decades that followed, HOAs would grow from neighborhood committees into nationwide empires, backed by money, lawyers, and laws designed to protect them rather than the people they governed. The age of control had only just begun. By the dawn of the 1980s, the Homeowners Association had evolved from a quiet neighborhood committee into a powerful private government. The suburban landscape stretched endlessly, a sea of cul-de-sacs and copy-paste homes guarded by brick walls and security gates. What had once been marketed as communities of harmony were, by then, networks of rules, fines, and quiet intimidation, all wrapped in the promise of order and value. The post-war dream had matured, and with it, the HOAs had discovered their true potential. Developers realized they could design entire cities within cities, controlled, predictable, and profitable. Each development was its own microcosm, governed not by elected officials, but by contract law. The power no longer came from City Hall. It came from the small print of a purchase agreement. Homeownership, once a symbol of freedom, now came bundled with obligation. Every buyer signed dozens of pages of covenants, conditions, and restrictions. And buried within them were the clauses that handed sweeping authority to the association. Most buyers skimmed, eager to close the deal, unaware that those few signatures would define their daily lives. With growth came money. Annual dues flowed in from every household, funding not just maintenance but bureaucracy, management companies, legal teams, and consultants. HOA boards, once composed of ordinary volunteers, became miniature political machines. Some members genuinely believed they were protecting their communities. Others discovered the intoxicating pleasure of unchecked control. A letter of warning here, a fine there, power could be exercised quietly, and it rarely met resistance. The system rewarded those who enforced, not those who questioned. Rule breakers were treated as threats to the collective good, even when their only crime was individuality. The HOA's language, protecting property values, maintaining standards, ensuring uniformity, masked a deeper truth. Conformity had become the price of peace. Behind closed doors, HOA boards began collaborating with corporate management firms. These companies promised efficiency and expertise, handling finances, violations, and legal matters. But in practice, they professionalized the system of control. Letters became more aggressive, fines more frequent, and lawsuits more common. A homeowner who missed a small payment could find themselves facing foreclosure, not from a bank, but from their own neighbors. The courts sided with the associations. Judges ruled again and again that the HOA contract was binding, a voluntary agreement between homeowners and their community. Yet there was nothing voluntary about it. One could not buy a home in a modern suburb without accepting the terms. Freedom of choice existed only in theory. By the mid-1990s, the numbers were staggering. Tens of millions of Americans lived under HOA rule. Entire states encouraged their formation as a cost-saving measure for municipalities. Roads, parks, lighting, and even storm drains became the HOA's responsibility, allowing cities to expand without paying for infrastructure. In return, homeowners paid private fees for public services, a hidden tax that came without representation. This new structure reshaped social dynamics. In many communities, the HOA board became the arbiter of morality. They decided what was acceptable, from paint colors to Christmas decorations. They could fine parents for children's bicycles left on driveways or threaten legal action over a garden deemed too wild. The smallest infractions were treated as challenges to authority. And yet, most people complied. The illusion of control was comforting. The lawns were perfect, the streets quiet, the neighbors polite. It was the visual perfection of American suburbia, and it came at the cost of individuality. The fear of conflict kept most residents silent. No one wanted to be the one who caused trouble. But beneath that silence, resentment simmered. Those who dared to resist found themselves isolated. Whispers spread, reputations tarnished. A single violation could become gossip at board meetings and community gatherings. "He doesn't care about the neighborhood," they'd say. "She's ruining our property values." The social pressure was as powerful as any fine. The HOAs had not just taken over property, they had reshaped the psychology of ownership. People began to self-police, trimming their hedges and repainting their shutters before the warning letters even arrived. Compliance became instinctive. Perfection was not just expected. It was required. By the turn of the millennium, the HOA industry had become a multi-billion-dollar empire. Trade groups, lobbyists, and national organizations defended it fiercely. They funded campaigns, drafted legislation, and built powerful legal frameworks to ensure that HOAs could operate with minimal interference. In many states, HOA boards had more immediate authority over a homeowner than the local government did. The marketing, however, never changed. Brochures still showed smiling families, clean parks, and shiny mailboxes. Developers still spoke of community, security, and peace of mind. The dark truth was hidden in plain sight. HOAs had become a parallel system of governance, unaccountable, private, and deeply entrenched in the fabric of modern housing. For many, it was simply normal. They accepted the fines, the meetings, the rules. They told themselves it was all worth it for the clean streets and quiet nights. But as with all systems built on control, cracks began to show. Disputes grew more aggressive. Homeowners started documenting abuses, selective enforcement, secret meetings, financial mismanagement. Stories leaked into local news. Retirees losing homes over small fees, veterans fined for flags, single mothers harassed for weeds in their yard. Each story revealed the same truth. The HOA's authority had gone unchecked for too long. And yet, reform was slow. The associations were protected by contracts, shielded by corporate law, and reinforced by apathy. Each homeowner believed they were alone, unaware that millions across the country were fighting the same invisible war against the same kind of board. The HOA was no longer just a neighborhood institution. It was a machine, a legal and psychological mechanism that maintained order, extracted compliance, and punished deviation, all while presenting itself as the guardian of the American dream. By the early 2000s, that dream was beginning to look more like a cage. The white fences still gleamed, but they no longer symbolized pride. They marked the boundary of control. And though few realized it, a quiet rebellion was brewing. The stories of those who fought back, who exposed the corruption, who refused to yield, would soon spread. The age of power was ending. The age of resistance was about to begin. By the time the 2010s arrived, the once unquestioned authority of HOAs had begun to fracture. For decades, they had ruled quietly, their power hidden behind polished lawns and formal meeting minutes. But now, technology had given homeowners a new weapon: connection. What had once been isolated battles in cul-de-sacs and gated communities began merging into something larger, a movement. The internet became the great equalizer. Homeowners who had been silenced by letters, fines, and threats suddenly found each other through forums, Facebook groups, and local news comment sections. They shared stories that were eerily similar: boards that abused power, presidents who ruled like monarchs, treasurers who misused funds. The names changed, but the patterns never did. Each story began the same way, with hope. People bought into the promise of a nice neighborhood, believing the HOA was there to help. But over time, they encountered the same slow corrosion: petty rules, unfair enforcement, selective punishment. A man fined for leaving his trash bin out a few hours too long. A family forced to remove a swing set. A veteran sued for flying a flag outside his porch. Small injustices at first, but they built into something greater, a realization that this wasn't about order. It was about control. For the first time, the hidden machinery of the HOA world was dragged into the light. Investigative journalists began digging into the financials behind large property management companies. They uncovered how many HOAs outsourced their operations to corporations that profited directly from violations and fines. Every letter sent, every legal notice issued, every late fee collected, all generated revenue. The system had monetized compliance. The image of the well-meaning neighborhood volunteer faded. What replaced it was a portrait of a complex, self-reinforcing system. Corporate lawyers drafting bylaws, lobbyists influencing housing policy, and management firms expanding their reach across entire states. HOAs were no longer local institutions, they were an industry. But industries can be challenged. In small pockets across the country, resistance began to take shape. Homeowners organized recall elections to remove corrupt boards. Others ran for positions themselves, not to gain power, but to dismantle it from within. Meetings once filled with silence became battlegrounds of principle. Cameras rolled. Recordings went viral. Social media changed everything. Videos of power-tripping board members yelling at residents or threatening homeowners with lawsuits exploded across YouTube and TikTok. Millions watched in disbelief as ordinary people stood up to their own neighbors and exposed the hypocrisy that had long gone unchecked. The HOA, once faceless, now had a face. And it wasn't pretty, yet the fight wasn't easy. For every homeowner who won, 10 more faced retaliation. Some were hit with frivolous fines. Others found themselves dragged into costly legal battles. A few even lost their homes, foreclosed upon for minor unpaid dues. The system was still rigged, the contracts still binding. But something fundamental had shifted. Fear had turned into awareness. Awareness became outrage. Laws began to change. In several states, reform bills were passed limiting HOA powers, restricting fines, enforcing transparency, and protecting homeowners' rights. For the first time in decades, legislators began to see what had long been hidden behind closed gates. And as more light was shed, more homeowners began asking questions. Why were they paying thousands of dollars a year to an organization that didn't represent them? Why could private boards hold more power than local governments? It became clear that the HOA wasn't just a legal entity. It was a mirror reflecting America's obsession with control, conformity, and image. The same desire for perfection that built the suburbs had also built their silent overseers. But now, that perfection was cracking. The rebellion wasn't loud or violent. It was steady, relentless, and digital. Forums turned into advocacy groups. Isolated cases became documentaries. Former board members began speaking out, confessing how they once enforced rules they didn't even believe in. "We thought we were protecting the neighborhood," many said. "We didn't realize we were policing it." Meanwhile, younger generations, those who had grown up watching their parents' battles with HOAs, began rejecting the model entirely. They moved into neighborhoods without associations, or into cities where individuality wasn't punished. Developers noticed. A quiet shift began. Communities marketing no HOA as a selling point, promising freedom instead of uniformity. The numbers told a story of their own. For the first time in decades, public opinion polls showed widespread distrust of HOAs. What had once been seen as symbols of order were now viewed as relics of control. The same institutions that once guarded the American dream were now accused of strangling it. Yet, not all was lost. Amid the rebellion, some associations changed for the better. Homeowners took control of their boards and rewrote their bylaws to restore fairness and transparency. Communities rediscovered the original purpose of the HOA, to maintain shared spaces, not to police private lives. These were rare victories, but they mattered. They proved the system could evolve if people demanded it. Still, the legacy of the HOA was impossible to erase. It had become embedded in the fabric of suburban America, an unavoidable feature of modern life. For every neighborhood that broke free, another two were built with new rules, new contracts, new boards. The cycle continued, but the illusion was gone. People now entered the system with their eyes open. The story of the HOA wasn't one of villains and heroes. It was a story of power. How easily it grows, how quietly it spreads, and how difficult it is to reclaim once surrendered. It began in the optimism of the 1960s and evolved into an empire of control, but it also revealed something enduring. The human instinct to resist when control goes too far. As the years go on, the rebellion continues, not through riots or lawsuits but through awareness. Every viral video, every expose, every neighbor who dares to question the board adds another crack in the wall of silence. Because in the end, the HOA is not just a set of rules. It's a reminder of what happens when people trade freedom for perfection, individuality for conformity, and community for control. The story isn't over. It never truly will be. As long as there are neighborhoods and fences and rules written in fine print, the balance between order and liberty will be tested again and again. But now, at least, the truth is out. The untold story of HOAs, how they started, and why they still control so many, has finally been told. And perhaps that's how the next chapter begins. Not with silence, but with understanding.